Japan, a country that has been known for its pacifism and anti-militarism for decades, is now facing a radical new direction in its security policy. The news made it world famous. Japan wants to set up a kind of Asian NATO. And that although the country, after the Second World War, passed a constitution that rejected the war as a means of policy forever. So it seems to be a completely new direction. The times of pure pacifism are over, and that has a few reasons. The geopolitical situation in Asia is getting worse and worse. China continues to build its military, North Korea regularly threatens with missile tests, and the tensions around Taiwan continue to increase. And then there would be the uncertainty about the role of the USA in the region. And so came the latest proposal of the new Japanese president, who would like to set up a kind of NATO 2.0 in Asia with some states. But what should this look like in detail? Which countries would take part in it? Would it be a realistic threat, and how high would their chances of success be? We will answer all these questions in today's video. Have fun! To understand the incredible importance of this advance, we first have to take a look at the past. The destruction of the atomic bomb waste, the millions of dead, and the economic destruction forced the country to find new ways. This would lead to the introduction of the famous pacifist Constitution of 1947. A central part of it is Article 9, in which Japan officially rejects the war as a means of national policy and abandons the construction of a regular army. However, this pacifist constitution was not only an internal decision of Japan. It was strongly influenced by the USA, who after the war watched over the new direction of Japan. Due to their influence, the Japanese were forced to drastically reduce their military power and instead focus on economic reconstruction and diplomacy. So, in the following decades, Japan consequently pursued a defensive foreign policy that focused on economic cooperation and peace. Only with the beginning of the Cold War did Japan quickly come to a different security policy. Due to its strategic position, Japan became one of the most important allies of the USA in the Pacific. In 1960, the Japanese-American Security Agreement was signed, which made Japan directly under the military shield of the USA. While the USA received the military presence, Japan was able to concentrate on ascending to one of the largest economic powers in the world. The situation of its own armed forces then changed only in the 1990s. Under the growing pressure from the USA, the Japanese began to modernize their self-defense forces step by step. Japan strictly held that its constitution forbids the use of forces of conflict to solve international conflicts. So the pacifist constitution remained unshakable. Until now. Because now everything should change. Japan's new security policy ambitions come from nowhere. The geopolitical situation in Asia has dramatically changed in recent years, and Japan is facing a series of threats. A key factor is China's rise. In recent years, the country has massively expanded its military and economic power. In particular in the southern Chinese Sea, Beijing has intensified its claims of strategically important island groups and promoted the construction of military bases. Also in the eastern Chinese Sea, there are conflicts between China and Japan around the Senkaku Islands, which are controlled by Japan, but claimed by China. These territorial disputes have further intensified tensions between the two countries. But the security concerns go far beyond China. North Korea, which has a growing arsenal of nuclear weapons and regularly conducts missile tests in close proximity to Japan, is perceived by Tokyo as a serious threat. North Korea is acting more and more aggressively and threatens more and more often with nuclear strikes. And so Japan feels threatened in the increasing escalation and is forced to react to this development. And then there would also be the factor of increasing uncertainty about the role of the USA in the region. Although the United States is still the main security guarantor of Japan, the geopolitical interests of Washington have shifted in recent years. The withdrawal of the USA from Afghanistan and the question of how the USA decided to be ready to engage in a possible conflict with China or North Korea aroused many doubts in Japan. And then we would also have the Ukraine war since 2022, which strengthened Japan's awareness of the need for a more robust security strategy. Russia's attack on Ukraine has caused worldwide shock waves and has shown that even in seemingly stable regions, warlike disputes can suddenly break out. And this has an impact on Asia, especially on the tensions around Taiwan. Japan considers a possible Chinese aggression against Taiwan to be a direct threat to its own security. And so came the latest advance of the new Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba. This requires a complete security policy reorientation. While Japan has long focused on pacifism and the protection of the USA, the country now seems to be preparing for an active role in the collective security of the region. The country wants to take its security back into its own hands after more than 70 years. And so Ishiba opened up his idea of founding an Asian NATO, a defense alliance that is similar to the NATO in Europe. The idea behind it is simple but ambitious. Japan wants to create a broad alliance in Asia that stands against common threats such as China and North Korea. Countries such as South Korea, Australia, India, and the Philippines are to become part of this alliance in order to stabilize the security situation in the region and to maintain common interests. Also, Canada, the United Kingdom, and France are to support the alliance. Japan is then supposed to stand up to the equal partner next to the USA. The main goal is to establish a collective defense policy in which an attack on one member is viewed as an attack on all. A concept that serves as a deterrent and that we already know from Article 5 of NATO. Another important step is to include Taiwan in the plans. This is under enormous pressure from China and many experts who fear that Beijing could take military steps one day to annex the island. Japan sees the defense of Taiwan as central to its own security, since an attack on Taiwan would also threaten Japan directly, trigger a global economic crisis, and be the beginning of a series of wars in the region. However, if Taiwan is embedded in a NATO-like security structure, China would certainly think twice about whether it is worth the risk. So there would be a gap with security. But the idea of an Asian NATO does not come without challenges. China has already made it clear that it considers any form of military alliance in its neighborhood as an external threat. At such a step, the tensions between Japan and China could increasingly intensify and destabilize the region already now. In addition, there are numerous differences within the possible member states. South Korea and Japan have a complicated historical relationship, and India could also be reluctant to engage in an alliance that brings it into direct confrontation with China. And even in Japan itself there are internal contradictions. Many Japanese are now strongly identified with the pacifist tradition of the country. The idea that Japan is more active militarily in the region could lead to great resistance. So Japan is in a pretty difficult situation. The pacifist attitude, which has shaped the country since the end of the Second World War, is increasingly challenged by geopolitical rivalries in Asia. For the country, it is clear that it has to play an active role in regional security. So far, however, there have been mainly bilateral alliances between individual states, although China always manages to play the partners against each other. A joint, bundled organization would certainly be the closest solution. But at present, the differences seem very big. The Western-oriented Asian states are less united than the European states, which is of course already due to the gigantic distances. While a consensus in Europe is usually difficult, it seems almost impossible in Asia at the moment. Ishida is self-confident that an Asian NATO is therefore not an easy process in the short term. And so, in a first step, the own military should be massively strengthened. Defense expenses should be doubled and a level of more than 2% of the GDP should be reached. The same goal is also set out in the NATO states. In addition, he is already working with support from the USA on numerous bi- and trilateral agreements that could actually form the basis for a kind of Asian NATO in the long term. But what do you think? Would an Asian NATO be successful and could actually scare off China and North Korea? Feel free to write it in the comments. Well folks, and with that, we end our video today. Thank you all for watching to the end. I hope you enjoyed our content. If you liked this video, we would be happy if you could like it and share the video on your social networks and subscribe to the channel. We have always appreciated your support. Now let's get ready for the next video here on our Wikipedia Plus channel. We'll be back soon. A big hug, and until then. Bye.